My name is Yaneta Le'i from Wailua, Hawaii, and I'm part of the Sundance Institute Indigenous Program. For over 40 years, Utah has been home to the Sundance Film Festival, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ute tribal nation, the ancestral keepers of the land that Sundance calls home. I would also like to honor the indigenous lands and people from which you join us, from our cold weather cousins in Sápmi lands to the Kanaka Maoli banded together atop Mauna Kea, Hawaii. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy our reimagined 2021 Sundance Film Festival.
So hi everyone, my name is Avi Venezuela is the full name, but nobody calls me that. And I am the director of Sundance's artist community. I'm leading the Artist Lounge with a wonderful team today, and this is the last original produced event for this Sundance Film Festival edition. I'm kind of emotional and excited about it, so welcome all to this space. I am Venezuelan, 6.1 feet tall, medium complexity. I have a gray background. I am calling from my office in Pasadena, California, near Los Angeles. I'm wearing a white jacket, a blue shirt, a pair of glasses, and a brown hat that I've been wearing for the past 15 years every single day. I shower with it. My pillow has the shape of the hat. It's a whole thing. So today's session is very special, not only because we're wrapping up the Artist Lounge, but because it features two of my favorite films at the 2021 Sundance Film Festival. They both make a significant impact emotionally and intellectually in me, and so I'm overjoyed with the panelists that are joining us today. The moderator is no exception to this rule. So Morgan Neville, as probably all of you know by now, is an Academy Award winner, a Grammy Award, and Emmy Award winning director for his work as a cultural documentarian. He's most famous for 20 Feet from Stardom from the 2014 Academy Awards, Won't You Be My Neighbor, Best of Enemies, 20 Feet, the list goes on and on and on. So before we just do like a protocol following intro, I'd rather just bring Morgan on screen so we can talk a little bit about him and what's he up to. How are you doing, brother?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you. Likewise, man. So happy to have you here. One thing I'm going to say that is not part of your bio, but it's definitely part of who you are. You are part of the Sundance family in so many ways. You've been a member of the jury in the past for the festival. And you're also a Sundance artist yourself. You're premiere at the festival before. We love you, and well, we look up to you for so many reasons. So before we move on to the panel, what are you up to?
You're making me blush, Abby. I'm sorry. And all three of the films you mentioned were all Sundance premieres. So I do have a long association with the festival from it was January of 2013, on the opening night, we premiered 20 Feet from Stardom. And it was kind of the night that changed my life. It was incredible. And I've had so many amazing experiences at the festival. So always happy to do anything I can to help you guys. And this festival's been no exception, even though I've been on my couch. I think I've watched 15 movies over the past 4 days. I know it's a blur. And it's great. Like, my mind is continually blown, and including both of today's films, which I'm really excited to talk about, which are amazing movies as well. So I guess to give the plug, I do have a film coming out at the end of the year that I've been working on for a couple of years now about Anthony Bourdain.
Oh, wow.
Who I loved, and I had the really fortunate experience over the past year, frankly, of traveling through him around the world again and again by working on this film. So even though I've been on my couch, mentally, I've been spinning the globe with Tony Bourdain.
Wow! I can't wait to watch it. When does it come out?
We don't know exactly. Sometime between midsummer and early fall.
All right. Okay. Yeah. We're gonna be in the lookout for it. Okay, Morgan, I'm gonna leave you the floor. I know we have an amazing panel today, so I'm gonna see you back in about an hour and a half.
Great.
All right.
See you soon.
Okay.
And I guess I will describe, I'm like too many documentary filmmakers, a middle-aged pasty white guy with glasses in my house in Pasadena, California, and I don't get enough sunlight, but that's okay because I sit in dark rooms and make films as much as I can. So that's me. And today we are here to talk about two amazing films, two films that are musical stories that span a large piece of history. They're also by two very accomplished creators, neither of whom has ever made a documentary before. So I find that really interesting, and I'm curious to hear what people learned along the way. And the results of both these films is superb in both cases. You know, really amazing films, and I'll brag on them later. But they both hit me in different ways. You know, the first of which I'll introduce is the Sparks Brothers, which is a film about the band Sparks, which is really the story of two brothers, Ron and Russell Mael, and their 50-year plus journey as unique and idiosyncratic creatives, and whose trajectory is always true and occasionally bisects culture at large and popularity, but they are always doing what they want to do in their own way. And it is the first documentary directed by our accomplished director, Edgar Wright, who will pop in here and join us in a minute. And there he is. Hi, Edgar. I think we can see you in a moment. And let me also bring on the rest of the team. Paul Trewartha, the editor. Paul, come in here. And George Henkin. Sorry, George. The producer of the Sparks Brothers. So the three of you come say hi.
Hello.
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 Hi,
Hello.
guys.
You take time.
And let me introduce our other film here, which is The Summer of Seoul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, a great subtitle there, which is about the Harlem Cultural Festival, which took place over the summer of 1969. While the White Woodstock was happening in upstate New York, in Harlem was this incredible cultural festival featuring the who's who of, you know, Black music in America at the time. Everybody from B.B. King, Fifth Dimension, Mahalia Jackson, Stevie Wonder, Sly and the Family Stone, Gladys Knight and the Pips. I mean, on and on and on. And you see evidence of all this in the film. It was directed by Amir Thompson, also known to some as Questlove, who could not be here because he has a day job playing on The Tonight Show. But we do have his team here with us to talk about it, including an old friend, Josh Pearson, the editor of Summer of Seoul. Come say hi, Josh. And there he is. And the three producers of this film, Joseph Patel, David Dinterstein, and Robert Fivlin. So come on in, guys.
Guys.
All right. So what I was thinking of doing is maybe talking about each film, asking a couple of questions about each film just for maybe 10 minutes, just to get a little bit of background, and then let's open it up and have a kind of a broader conversation, because we have more time than we normally have, and this is more than just a Q&A. This is really meant to be a conversation. So let me just start by asking a couple of questions about the Summer of Seoul. Actually, let me start with Sparks Brothers. Okay, let me start with Edgar. So it's the inevitable question: where did this come from? How did this happen? And I want to ask it with a bit of a twist, which is when you first approached making this film, what did you think you were going to do? You know, I'm always curious how one's original intent changes over time. But, you know, in the beginning, when this was presented to you, or when you chased it, tell me, you know, what was your idea for this film?
Well, I guess you know, I'd been a Sparks fan since I was very small, and I guess for quite a long time they'd been a bit of a riddle to me, because they were a band, as you see in the documentary, that came in and out of pop culture. And so every time they come back, I'd be like, wait, are these the guys that I saw on TV 15 years ago? What's happening? It seems to sort of be very unusual trajectory for a band. And then I think like I became like a really hardcore fan in this century. Does that sound weird to say? But like since like 2000, just like because again, they were releasing album after album since about 2002 that were like so good and seemed to be completely at odds with any band that started in like the late 60s, early 70s. It just didn't seem possible that they were releasing so much uncompromising, ambitious material. And it was as good as the stuff in the 70s, which is like, you don't say about a lot of 70s bands. Usually people just want to talk about the 70s albums. So, and there's this aspect with Sparks where I think when you become a fan, you start to become an evangelist. And I found myself more often than not in conversations about music, turning around to Sparks, and some people would know them, some people would have no idea. And I think I sort of said this in jest, but it was sort of true, is I felt like at some point I think I felt that making a film about them would be easier than having to explain them over dinner. but really what happened is that I think I'd always been interested in doing a documentary, but I'd never like really been about to jump in because I wasn't sort of sure of what like sort of subjects I would want to spend several years on. And then I really kind of like just kind of walked straight into it in a way, because I'd said over a number of times to people who would listen that I felt that Sparks were like the best and most influential band who had not had a documentary about them. And I think the final time I said it to somebody who would listen was at a Sparks gig, and I was standing with the director Phil Lord in the balcony. We'd both gone to see Sparks together, and I said the same thing to him. I said, you know, the only thing stopping these guys from being as big as they should be is like a documentary, like an overview, and then people could understand the context of their story, and everybody would realize that they were ahead of the curve all the way, and make them as big as they should be. And Phil said, you should make that movie. And I was like, yes, I will. And then that night, like an hour or two later, I backstage at the gig, I pitched it to Ron and Russell from Sparks. And once I had said it out loud, I could not let them down. So it was a verbal contract made 3 years ago, and now here we are, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great. So that was 3 years. And I mean, another part of the film is you have this incredible lineup of people talking about the band. And, you know, as you get the sense from the film and from what you're saying, those who got Sparks and get Sparks are evangelical about it. So you have this incredible group, everybody from, you know, Weird Al Yankovic to Duran Duran to Neil Gaiman, Patton Oswalt. I just had a question about how many people did you talk to? How do you decide who to talk to? And do you have another 100 people on the cutting room floor too?
I think maybe there's 5 people on the cutting room floor. Like, a fact at the end where we just, well, basically what I felt was, and the reason of having all those people is because they are a band that kind of like, maybe, and hopefully this will change things, but that sort of have a lot of famous fans. And I felt like if it was a band that you'd never heard of before, you know, like literally in the opening sequence of the movie are a lot of famous people, and also a lot of famous people from bands who are bigger than Sparks, the Sex Pistols, New Order, you know, Duran Duran, you know, Depeche Mode, Beck, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers. So the idea with that was that you would just say, who is this band that all these other people from really famous bands are saying was a huge influence on them? That was really the thing. There is this thing with the band that they had become like the sort of the band's band, or your favorite band's favorite band. And so it was really to sort of reflect that, and also to just show sort of what, to answer your other question about what did I learn along the way, is I guess in making it, it became like sort of, by sharing the context of how they came to be, you see all the pop culture that they were into, music and film, and how that went into the music, and then how that influenced everybody else. So it sort of, it charts the entire history of the band, but also shows how sort of music is changing along the way. And in terms of wrangling all that, I have to give credit to George in this other window here, who, like, I mean, I'm not into, George can probably give you the hard stats on what the process was of interviewing 80 plus people. All of them were done in person. There was one person that we had to do by Skype. And also, if you've seen the movie, we did them all in the studio. I wanted them to all be in a sort of a formal, we decided to shoot all of the interviews like the cover of Sparks' album Big Beat, which was shot by Richard Avedon. So I thought, why don't we shoot all of the interviews like a Richard Avedon with a gray backdrop.
Yep.
So that made it not challenging, but that meant we had to schedule people on the same day, because it wasn't a case of like somebody can record something on Zoom or on their iPhone. We had to get people to a studio. So that was in itself quite a major event.
Sure. Well, and great work, George, on that. I know producers never get enough credit, nor do editors, with wrangling all that. And I also read, I think, just today that you actually used the black and white camera to shoot it too, which is cool.
It did. I mean, that was there were times when I thought that was a completely ridiculous decision to have made, but you know, it was Jake Polonsky, the DP, because Edgar had this very clear idea right from the get-go that he wanted all the interviews to have this Richard Abbott, that he wanted them to have that identity, that he wanted to reference this the Big Beat cover. And Jake Polonsky, the DP, you know, we went and did a bunch of camera tests, and I was reticent about the idea of shooting on a mono camera, but we looked at the tests and it was just like, you know what, this is too beautiful. We, you know, it might throw up some challenges along the way, but this, you know, that was Edgar's clear idea from the outset, was that he wanted all the interviews to have this look, and that camera was the way to achieve it in the most satisfying way.
Absolutely. And just one last question for Team Sparks before we move on, which is to that black and white end. The thing that I didn't really know about Sparks was what cinephiles they were. You know, and they had a project they had worked on with Jacques Tati that did not happen, a project with Tim Burton that did not happen. They had studied film. They were huge fans of, French New Wave cinema. And you're the first one to actually finish a film with them. So I'm just curious, in terms of them understanding the kind of language and grammar of cinema that played into making the film.
Well, they're very, I mean, you know, I think they are kind of frustrated film directors themselves, or at least filmmakers, but that's something that's very clear from their music and also even just their album covers. I mean, one of the things that's funny is in the movie, you see like Russell's UCLA film, which was a kind of French New Wave, like sort of pastiche. And what's funny is that I made exactly the same film when I was 18. And when I saw his film, I sent him my version of exactly the same thing. So I think, oh, I guess we are kind of alike. We both did exactly the same a Buddha souffle ripoff when we were like 18 years old. It was stunning how close they were. There wasn't time enough in the film or any reason to put mine in, but I was a bit taken aback by that. But I think the thing, or maybe as Paul can speak to this quickly, is that the other thing that was a gift about that as a sort of, as a B plot, was, you know, there was this other strand that was really important to them beyond the music, and kind of another like sort of ambition that was more thwarted than their musical ambitions. I mean, the irony is that then this year, after no Sparks movies for 50 years, there's my documentary and their film with Leos Carax is coming out later this year. So it's funny that now that there'll be, in essence, 2 Sparks films.
It's raining Sparks. That's great. So let me turn to the Summer of Seoul. So this is a film directed by Amir Thompson. You know, what a perfect director for this film. You know, you know, when I heard he was working on the film, I just thought, oh yeah, that makes sense in so many ways. So I guess the first question for the producers, since this is, you know, a long gestating project, that the footage had sat in a basement for 50 years, but I know that it was a many year effort to actually get this film up onto screen and do it the right way. So, you know, I don't know if that was David or Robert, who was there at the beginning, and what led to finally getting Amir to get this done.
You're on mute, Robert. So yeah, it was a really long journey. I was an executive at a film company and was approached by a friend, Phil Michelson, who told me about this legend of the footage. And I went and sought it out and brought it to the company that I was working for at the time. And they were interested. And before I knew it, they had sold the company. And I said, well, okay, I love this footage. I love this project. I'm gonna make this happen. And, you know, never thought it would be a decade later, but it was, it's been a labor of love. And David and I had known each other for a while, and I brought it to Josh and Radical and Joseph and Amir, and we came to the same conclusion that the film really needed a proper ambassador and a storyteller like Amir, and here we are.
And now maybe for all three of you producers, how'd you talk him into doing it? Was that easy, or was that did that take work?
Well, I'll sort of go through the story. Robert and I, when we said, wouldn't he be, an ideal director for this project, set a meeting with him, and the meeting took place in his dressing room at the Tonight Show. And we shared some of the footage with Amir at that time. He was getting ready for the show itself. We basically screened, roughly 5 to 8 minutes of some of the footage that we had, and he was just freaked out over this. Partially because he loved it, but partially because he was kicking himself for not knowing about this, and he just couldn't believe it actually took place. If you know Amir, he is a musicologist and literally knows, from A to Z about a music, whether it's, pop to funk to soul to rock, just to bluegrass, you just name it. And he said, listen, this sounds amazing. And I think he talks about it now, where he was sort of shocked that we wanted him to direct, having never directed a film before. And I think at first it was sort of an amazing ask, and I think once he sort of thought about it, he was like, oh my God, this is a major responsibility. But that's where, we teamed up with Joseph and then, and Josh, and sort of put together a very collaborative team to sort of, take the 40 plus hours of footage and with Amir at the helm, try and tell, a story and not just a performance of a musical acts. And and here we are.
Yeah,
it's just amazing.
Amazing. No, and the film is so strong. I got way too many goosebumps watching it. There's so many moments that really just stop you in your tracks. The Mahalia Jackson, Mavis Staples duet has got to be one of the all-time great music on film moments. You've got these incredible goods. I'm wondering, it was many years gestating. Did the bulk of the production really just happen in the past year and kind of come together? And how did the events, and I guess it's a question for everybody, how did the events of the past year, the fact that we're all on our own couches in our own spaces, how did that not just change how you made the film, but the film itself?
So we started writing the treatment for this documentary probably in 2018, really, when we started to see what it could be. And I think that, even back then, Amir's initial reaction was, it could be just a concert film and we'd just be fine, right? Because the music itself is great. But there's something sort of nagging in the back of his head about the events around the festival, what's happening off stage in 69 in Harlem, and really how nothing had changed in 50 years, right? There's a lot of progress and there's not a lot of progress at all socially. And I think that's something that really, it became evident very early on that that's sort of the story we wanted to make is why this festival happened, what were the social conditions that sort of, made it necessary to happen. We didn't want to be ham-fisted about it. We didn't want to be, be too obnoxious about it. but we thought it was important to sort of tell the story of what's happening on stage and then also the story of what's happening off, because they're related. And then we sort of went into production in earnest. David, Robert, what would you say, late 2019 or late summer 2019?
Yeah.
We were aiming for the pandemic.
And it's funny, actually, Edgar and George, when you guys were talking about shooting your interviews on this set, we actually made the decision to do that as well. We created a set, and we were doing interviews, and then the pandemic happened, and we were sort of boxed into this look and feel for the interviews, and we had to make some really crafty, creative decisions to do that, because a lot of the people that we talked to are on the older side of things. And with COVID in its early stages, you know, our sort of first thought was to make sure that we're not putting anyone in jeopardy trying to finish the film. So
when Joseph is talking about crafty decisions, he means like shooting in a garage in Florida. But it's crazy.
Yeah, we shot on a farm where there were chickens in the background and crickets and cicadas, and but Josh, our editor, who is an absolute genius, he's got his basement set up there, and you know, very quickly into the pandemic, we were able to figure out a sort of workflow to make it happen.
And maybe this is an opportunity just to ask Josh and Paul to just talk about cutting these films in quarantine. Did you notice any difference? Nobody over your shoulder telling you what to do, right? This is how you like it?
I'd say that in a funny way, aside from the horror of a global pandemic happening, it was kind of a blessing in disguise for me personally, because it was sort of like a time extension in a way. You know, things got production got fouled up and shut down, and I was able to actually keep working on it. So I was kind of running solo for a couple months, just shooting cuts over to Joseph every now and then. And, you know, I did actually really get to do probably a much deeper dive into the archival that had been gathered, all this wonderful archival from the late 60s that I may not have gotten a chance to do in such thoroughness had there not been a lockdown. And yes, it is nice to be alone.
I think the thing about sort of documentary edits generally is the fact that you do actually need quite a lot of time on your own to actually sort of go through the rushes, to investigate the rushes. It doesn't work in the same way with scripted, because you're not realizing something that everyone's aware of. You're finding the things. And so, you know, you do need time. And I think I was quite lucky because I think like Josh, I mean, I've been set up way beforehand. So it was quite a natural progression. Just, you know, it was just the same as, you know, everything was changing outside my window, but actually inside the suite it felt very, very similar. So, and you know, we had so much archive to go through as well. I think we were really lucky in as much as the way that the split happened. There was this huge benefit towards the front of the edit where I was sitting literally alongside the archivist. And it was a super creative atmosphere where we were able to to and fro and just put requests out there for archival assets. And Kate and Tess were absolutely phenomenal, and they would respond so quickly, and an idea could be realized on your screen within half an hour. And so that was a massive benefit at the front end. And then at the back end, where the cut had taken shape and we were manipulating and feeding back on notes, that was more sort of independent. So I think the timing, we were very lucky, is what I would say. We were very lucky.
And a quick question to follow up with you, Paul and Josh. How long were your first cuts? Be honest.
Josh, you go first.
Yeah, probably 2.5 hours for me. I mean,
okay.
You know,
that's not true, Josh. It was
was it?
It was over 3.
You
see, the
I said be honest.
Is,
yeah.
The funny thing is that I think in a lot of instances, people talk about long first cuts, but actually, you know, you sort of know they're like rushes assemblies. Do you know what I mean? And they're string outs and things like that. And we all get massively long string outs. I think the difference for me with Sparks and other docs is because we were investigating each album, we felt like what we needed to do was do justice to each album. And then actually we got to a point where we had really nicely packaged individual albums, and they were working independently. And then you put those together, and I think there was a point where we had a 6-hour fully cut, there was music operating under all of it. 10th grade, really had gone for it. And it was, we had a full 6-hour version. And I remember at Christmas, I think that it was down to sort of 4, wasn't it? And then we sort of taped it down. But the beauty of that is the fact that what we were able to do is, sort of really navigate and identify their arc, their development over the period of 25 albums, and hopefully show their, sort of creative growth through the albums. And that was actually realized by producing them individually. So,
and I will say on these 2 projects, these are 2 projects where I think there is a large audience to see the 6-hour and the 3-hour. Maybe.
Well,
somebody has to pay for all that archive.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's the problem with archive.
It's problem.
It's your friend when it comes in, and it's not your friend at the back end. So it's kind of, we had, I asked my assistant to, sort of look into the details on this, and there were 6,282 individual archival assets, and some of them were big, really big, some full shows and stuff like that. And there were 2,128 archival cuts that needed to be eye-matched in the final edit. So there was a sort of ridiculous amount of archive.
Can I ask a question? I'm just curious, how much of the archives came from the Sparks themselves? What were they able to provide that helped out?
They had some of their videos, especially ones that there was one video that they'd self-directed, but more of the personal stuff came from them. I think sort of the TV stuff was a matter of us finding the best versions of things that were out there. And there would be times when I'd show Ron and Russell a clip. And then bear in mind, Ron and Russell are not people who have had big drug. They weren't, let me just say, they were not lost in a drugs haze in the 70s and 80s. However, I would show them a clip of something and they'd say, I have no recollection of shooting that. So it would be quite funny to just sit there and show them clips of 70s TV shows that they had no recollection of. But George, maybe you could speak about some of the more personal stuff that came from them.
Well, there's obviously their home movie footage, which is, the thing about Ron and Russell is that they've kind of carried this this childhood sibling world that they created as kids throughout their entire life and their entire career. So to see to have that home movie stuff of theirs was wonderful. There were great photographs as well. And then there were really interesting things. I got in touch very early on with a guy who'd worked at Island when Ron and Russell, when Sparks were signed to Island in the early 70s. And he knew of the existence of this thing that had been made about the record industry for British TV, which contained this footage of Ron and Russell recording propaganda in the studio with Muff Winwood. And that had never been seen before, that had just so happened that we happened to come across this guy who went, oh, I think I remember. And, so that sort of stuff was a treat to find. Kate found some incredible stuff of them touring in Europe in the early 70s. But then there was also that, as Paul was referring to earlier, the fact that we were in the cutting room with our archive team meant that when because this is the beauty of it, you don't go out with a set idea, do you, Edgar, of exactly what bits of archive you want to illustrate a certain thing. A sort of nexus point arrives and you're like, aha, this, like the footage of failed attempts at flying, for instance. That was something that just became, it was a perfect metaphor. And to have Tess and Kate there in the room with us meant that rather than having to kind of relay an idea for something that you wanted to illustrate and translate it through, through an email, they're in the room with us and they can see what we're doing and they can immediately respond and come up with the perfect footage. So that part of the process was was really, really enjoyable.
It's interesting as well because
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say they the other thing that happens, generally on documentaries is when you do get provided assets from contributors, or in this case Ron and Russell, they may have recorded shows, and those they're good for inspiration, but it's a very dangerous thing. These early easy wins that again become so problematic at the back end. So quite often something would be found that may have been sourced by them, but then obviously Cake and Tess would then go back, find the original source, find the best source, make sure it's available to us, and all of these sorts of things. I mean, they were amazing. Every single archival asset was numbered, had a code, went through FileMaker, and came to me, and it was organized in that respect, so it was searchable. And then obviously when you get to the back end and you're tracing all of that archive, it's great, as opposed to, oh my goodness, we love the film now, how do we, sort of bring it to online, which is your worst nightmare, basically. So fortunately, we didn't have any of that.
Let me just ask another question, because I think both these films do something else very deftly, which is they let the music breathe. And I think I'm sure that's important to both teams, but maybe you guys can talk about it. The role of how you use music in a music documentary, that it's not just there to be wallpaper and to fill in people talking, but to actually find a balance with what's being said and letting the music speak for itself. So anybody want to take that?
I have a bugbear in some music documentaries, and these are even some documentaries I really like, is that I see quite a lot of documentaries where the makers assume that you. So what happens is you get kind of like, and I won't mention any names of any documentaries, but you get some great artists where you're thinking, well, if I didn't know so and so, like this documentary is not giving me the opportunity to hear it at all. Like somebody's. So we actually did do a cut of Sparks where we sort of timed it up a little bit, and I think it was after we was the only thing we could do in lockdown. We can do a friends and family. I would just send it to separate people with very different knowledge of the band, and like one person, who got back in touch said, I really liked it. I just wanted to hear a bit more of the songs, and I was like, I'm totally with you. And then me and Paul just went through and just opened up like parts of it. So it's like, let's at least hear the whole line. There was something that I saw recently where it was a documentary which I otherwise really loved, where they never let you hear the big song, even like one line of it, without somebody talking through it. And I was like, man, some 14-year-olds haven't heard this song before. So my theory was, especially with Sparks, who are a band that, like, the idea with the documentary, this one, is that you don't have to have any pre-knowledge coming in. And if that's the case, you need some context. And it's like, here's some Sparks. So by the end of it, you've got like a dozen earworms in your head. That was the idea anyway.
And obviously, Summer of Seoul is all, you're building off this incredible performance too. So
I kind of developed we were faced with a tricky task, which was to present this concert film, and really with the focus on the concert footage, because it's so incredible and no one had seen it in 50 years. And but we were also trying to give this glimpse of what was happening off stage in '69 in New York, in Harlem, in the country, and give a little background context to it all. So it was very difficult, and we were just trying to walk a real razor's edge of, is it too much? Is it, can we just take out one sentence of some of this archival and let the music breathe more? And I as far as, interrupting a song, I did actually sort of develop a funny little rule of thumb for myself, which is I was looking at the footage one day and I thought, okay, so if I was actually in an outdoor festival with a friend watching a great band, how long would it take for me to lean over to my friend and say something about the band to them? Like, oh man, these guys are great, aren't they? So it's sort of like, it seemed to be about a minute and a half. I felt like you could let a song play for a minute and a half, 2 minutes before a little interruption. We tried to keep the interruptions very brief. So yeah, but it was fun to sort of pretend I was at an outdoor music festival.
I would also say that, you know, in respect to our film, Amir, the entire team really wanted to make this an immersive experience. And, you know, in order to do that, two things were very important. And by the way, everyone on this panel right now in respect to our team all loves or works or comes from the musical world. Josh himself is a musician. Joseph is a journalist. Robert and I are just huge fans, and Amir, of course, you know, is a musician amongst other things. And I think, you know, not only are we fans, we wanted to show respect to the music as well. So we didn't want to just, you know, provide a glimpse. And I think it was really important not only to immerse our viewers, you know, into the music as though they were there, hopefully, but it was important to show the audience and immerse them into what others were doing during that time and at that time. And we were lucky enough because Hal Tolchin, who shot the original footage in 1969, really cared about the audience too. He put a camera on the audience. So we had a lot to cut away to, and that was really nice.
I mean, the audience shots are incredible in the film. I mean, the clothes alone.
The hairstyles, the joy of their faces, it's really great. I have a quick anecdote to share about the way Amir thinks as it pertains to the music editing, is that when we first met with Josh, it was me, Amir, and Zara were meeting with Josh, and you know, we obviously knew his work, and Robert and David had advocated for him, and we just had never met in person before. So we go to the Radical office and we meet Josh. And the thing that Amir and that really struck us is Josh is a musician. He was in a band I have CDs of in my home. And Amir just, it was so important to him to have an editor that understood timing and rhythm, because he just felt like that's what the film was going to be. And somewhere in our editing process, the way Amir speaks is in pop cultural references. And so he said, I want the film to feel like Public Enemy's first two albums. And I'm sort of like his translator. And so I'm able to help translate that to Josh, which is like very sample heavy, and his band was very sample heavy. So he immediately got it. And it's one of the things that I just loved about our team is just, we could, you know, Amir has these references, and then it's sort of like disseminating that information, and it all just sort of makes sense.
Great. So you're the bomb squad, Josh. You're mixing it up, right? Two turntables.
Yeah.
And it worked really well, I have to say. You know, I absolutely loved the fact that there was the rhythm within the archive, you know, working through the music, you know, because it added to the track, you know, and it was just really impactful. So yeah, really nicely done.
Thank you. Well, it is interesting because we did, you know, there are certain scenes where it's very obvious and very rhythmic, like the moon landing scene where talking heads are popping up to the beat. And that all relates back to the band I was in the 90s called Emergency Broadcast Network, where we edited music videos as if we had a video sampler. And it's kind of funny because the idea of a video sampler kind of is out there now. You can buy software that lets you hit a key on a keyboard and it triggers video clips with audio. And, you know, I think DJs do use them sometimes, but that whole idea never really took off. And, you know, after I moved into documentary filmmaking, it's been a long time since I've been able to edit stuff in that rhythmic way. So it was super fun.
I have another question selfishly that I'm curious about, because many of you have worked in the scripted narrative world, and particularly Edgar. What did you make of the translation? You know, is it, did you feel that you were well prepared, or you had a steep learning curve? You know, what was it like taking one skill set and applying it to documentary?
I guess the tricky thing, and so we sort of tried to sort of be, you know, like sort of apply like the sort of formula of a, you know, 3-act structure of a feature film to a documentary, which works to a certain extent, but Sparks have quite an unusual narrative because it's not like a rise and fall and rise. They're sort of going like this all the way through. So I think it was just, I think if anything, like for me, just it was just trying to sort of at a certain point, in a very nice way, it became a bit of an embarrassment of riches. We had all this great, amazing archive, and we had so many great talking heads. And then, I guess, and this is where, like, you know, George like helped me out enormously, is you sort of like constantly trying to think, have you asked everything, and do you have everything for the building blocks of the story, you know? So, and especially once you start editing and you can do later interviews. Like I think we interviewed, George, correct me, I think we interviewed Ronald Russell like 4 separate times, right?
Let me think. Yeah, I think it might have been, yeah, it might have been 5, Edgar. It might have been 5. We had, yeah, 10 plus hours of Ron and Russell.
18 hours.
18 hours.
18 hours of interviews.
Yeah, 10
you can see I've got my stats going here. So
the good thing with that was in the final session, I could like ask them or ask them to directly to respond what other people had said, sometimes quite contentious things. So that was really good. And then the final thing, I mean, it's funny, it didn't really occur to me. What's quite unusual about doing a documentary is also nearly all of their interviews, they're on camera at the same time, which is quite an unusual thing, like in a music documentary, to have like a 2-shot, like the brothers are sort of never really separated. And then I did at the very end, I sort of, and I think that's just generally how they like to do interviews. And they've got this, they're not identical twins, but they do have that symbiotic sort of telepathy whereby they never answer at the same time. Like one takes it and the other one takes it. And those are some of my favorite bits in the documentary, where maybe Russell is saying the diplomatic version of something and Ron is like smirking on the other side of the 2-shot, to the point where he knows his brother is smirking and he can't quite get through it.
The Miss Christine story, yeah.
Yeah, and then the thing that happened at the end is that I did say I need like 90 minutes with you separately. And what was interesting was that separately, then like I said, they're not identical twins, but I did hear, like when I was interviewing Ron or Russell separately, that the other one was just waiting for them and kind of just wondering, just kept asking our associate producer Leo, saying, how do you think it's going? And I thought that was so sweet that they actually, like, rather than take 90 minutes off, they just waited for their brother. I thought there was something beautiful about that. So in terms of lessons learned, I think it was just a thing about, you know, creating an oral history. You're sort of looking, you know, that was one of the gifts of having other people, is that like, there might be something that they didn't want to talk about or talk about in such negative terms, but somebody else could. And so there were some interviewees. I just wanted to say, actually, on the chat, I noticed somebody, and I just wanted to shout out to this person. Andrea Feldman said, it's very poignant to see Gary Stewart, who passed away tragically last year. Gary Stewart was in our documentary, and he was one of my favorite interviews. And so and he says my favorite thing in the documentary. So I get a bit teary whenever, not just because it's Gary and he's no longer with us, but also the thing that he says towards the end is he says that he never chastises people for being new to the band. He says, I never say, I've been into them for 40 years. Where were you? I say, welcome aboard and here's more. And we put it right at the end of the documentary because it was really sort of poignant to me. And also, sadly, Gary is no longer with us. So I just wanted to say thanks, Andrea, for mentioning that, because he's one of my favorite things in the documentary.
Absolutely. After I saw the film, I sent you an email, and because I knew Gary and loved Gary, and it, you know, was so great to see him there in the film. So thanks for sharing that. And
I had a very interesting, a really interesting conversation with Gary after we did his interview, which was about the nature of truth. And the fact that there is no one absolute truth, and that if you're telling a story about Ron and Russell, that you know, that there are going to be many variations on the theme, and the way to do it is to, you know, we were so lucky that that Edgar had this passionate desire to make the film from the perspective of a true fan. It wasn't about giving, you know, going into every single little detail of what makes Ron and Russell tick, because that is an entirely subjective thing. And I will never, that conversation with Gary was something that kind of stayed in the back of my mind throughout the whole process of making the film.
Yeah, I mean, those of us who make documentary know that the truth is a prism, and we're all just dancing in the light there. But I wanted to ask a question. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think there are lots of people who are, loads of people love Ron and Russell for very good reasons. Loads of people respect Ron and Russell. And there were loads of comments of them talking very positively about them. And we've used a lot of them. But I think what we thought was really important is that actually, obviously, you let the audience find their own way through, make their own connections, and I think it's actually in doing that, the positivity that you're hearing verbalized is realized personally. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's one thing just to say it, but actually over the period of hopefully, the reason why it's as long as it is because it allows you to see their development, and then things at the end will sort of make sense for you personally, and there are a lot of connections in there. And I think people are picking up on different connections, as is the case in anybody's life, so I think that was quite important. And that was the benefit of having this plethora of rushes, basically.
Well, one thing that I think about being different with documentary too is that we often begin a documentary because we're excited about a subject, or there's incredible footage, or a band we love. And then at a certain point, we have to figure out what the film's really about. It's not just about our love for the band. It's not just about this incredible footage. It's about what are we really trying to say here? And both your films have real messages. And sometimes that message for me comes early. Sometimes it comes, frankly, when I screen it for an audience for the first time. And I'm just curious, your journey. I mean, I know particularly Summer of Seoul took on a lot of weight because I heard Amir talking about it, through the Black Lives Matter protests and seeing how it resonates in 2021 now, watching it. But I guess for everybody, coming to that kind of deeper idea of what you really were trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, oh, go ahead, David.
No, please.
I was just going to say, I think you can watch the film and, it can mean different things to different people. I know I've said this before when I first started, working with the film, there was, it meant something very different watching it when Obama was president than it meant when George Floyd was killed. And, I think it's a testament to the footage itself because it is a reflection of where we are now, seen through the lens of 1969. And, I know we talked a long time when we got started, once we realized we wanted to use this footage to tell a story, how are we going to lay it out and how could we use the music to tell that story? And, clearly it's a testament. I mean, Josh has already talked about it, but how we were able to get enough of the music in there, the way he edited it, the way he put it together to, combine a lot of the music with a lot of, the story that we wanted to tell. So
I would also add that, part of our journey, part of our story was not only about, the beautiful performances and amazing performances, but was also about the community in which it took place in. Literally there was a concert that took place 100 miles away in and around the same time with roughly the same amount of people attending. And that became an iconic event. And the Harlem concerts were lost, literally. And they were rarely covered in the media. And I just felt that, we started as we watched the footage to understand the context in which this concert came together and how challenging it must have been during that time to not only throw a concert where 300,000 people attended for free, but to do it in a city park in the middle of the summer, with very little money to produce it, where they needed to set up the stage in a specific direction because there were no lights. So the sun had to hit it in a certain way. And how, the local promoter, Tony Lawrence, was able to convince the city politicians to back him, and how they were able to find, a sponsor to help augment their needs to produce this. And then, of course, Hal Tolchin, who on his own, he shot this on spec with 5 cameras and a full crew, and then took care of the footage for years, hoping that he would be able to, find a distributor where he could put together either a series or a documentary. And this has been going on for close to 50 years until Robert and I were able to convince him to entrust us with the footage to sort of, jumpstart what we have today. So it's just an incredible story, and it's deeply felt. And to us, we're so passionate about it because it's not just a film, which in its own right, we would love and be proud to be associated with it. But there is a responsibility we feel now that has sort of come through this, that we need to sort of ride this wave on. So
I think a lot of what David's saying relates to Joseph and Amir's work interviewing the subjects. I think a really important aspect of drawing that out was talking to subjects about it. And I don't know, Joseph, you want to talk about finding the audience member, the regular people who were attendees, not only them, but also the big famous artists, and the decision to show them the footage.
Yeah, I mean, we're finding people who went to a festival 50 years ago that hasn't been really publicized in the years since was a huge challenge. And we cast a pretty wide net. Harlem is very Harlem is a city unto itself, and but there's a lot of families there. They're there for generations. So one of the first things we did, obviously, is social media, but we just put boots on the ground in Harlem, social clubs, churches, friends and family that we knew that had been living there for generations, and we were able to find people. But the other challenge is finding people who remember and whose memories are clear. And a lot of people we talked to who had vivid recollections of the festival, one of the things that was really special is they had vivid recollections because this meant a lot to them. And that was a really powerful thing to come to terms with. So it just made sense to, well, we want to jog their memories. We should show them some footage, but we should get it on camera. And I think that was something that our entire team agreed would be a good idea. And because if it doesn't go well, then fine, you don't have to use it. But it was seeing joy in their eyes and seeing these memories flood back. It's really crazy. In the beginning of the film, we have a guy named Musa Jackson. He bookends the film. He was 5 when he went to the festival. And when we talked to him, we're just like, okay, what could he really remember as a 5-year-old going to the park in 1969? No one's seen this footage. And he recalled the Fifth Dimension in perfect detail. He remembered what they were wearing. He remembered the color. He remembered them passing balloons at the park, balloons on stage and letting them go, which is in footage that's not in the film, but it was part of their set. He remembered it vividly. And so when we showed it to him, he just was in tears because, and you see this exchange at the end of the movie where he tells Amir, he's like, I'm not crazy. And that's, it's so powerful to just see that. It just was just an incredible layer to the film.
Well, I mean, the film is about this event that has been, in a way, erased until this moment, a part of this cultural erasure that happens. And here, the same summer, Woodstock is this huge, Warner Brothers released film that wins Best Documentary. And this footage goes into a basement, and again, just to pull out the similarities between the films, Sparks as well, a band who, is often forgotten or at the margins or, kind of off, not getting the credit they're due. And I think that's part of this thing we're all sharing here is the sense of like, I want to share with you this incredible thing I know about or found or have to put in front of you.
Can I just say something to the Sparks team? So I thought your filmmaking really matched the creativity of the band. And that was the thing that I really loved about the documentary. And I think part of it is probably because Edgar, you come from a scripted world, but it just was such like the animation, the collage style animation, and like the fake movie poster, and like the singing over the credits and the opening credits in the beginning. Like the documentary felt really alive and really creative, and I thought it really matched the style of music that Sparks makes. So, props.
Oh, thank you. that was sort of the intention, was to and I want to say something about your film in a second, actually. So let me double back to that. But I think that was the sort of the idea was that, like, and I guess in a weird way, something that I discovered is like funny, like finding that me and Russell's student films are identical. Was that I felt in making it, thinking, oh, I guess my sense of humor is quite similar to Sparks. So there was nothing I could really throw at them that they were not game to do. And actually, the fanfare thing that you mentioned was the last thing done, because we didn't have anything at the start. It just started, and I sort of said, because also I'm not a fan of like studio fanfare like sounds, and I just thought, it seems such a bummer to start the movie with, no disrespect to the MRC logo, but just with like that. So I just punted it to Ron and Russell like quite recently as well. And that was what they sent back. And then it was kind of like getting a Christmas present or something. It's like, oh my God, a Sparks song that mentions me. But one thing I wanted to say about your film, and I don't think I answered your question either, Morgan, about what the documentary is actually about. But one thing I really loved in Summer of Seoul was that in the decision to make it a documentary rather than a concert film, is that you could give real context to moments. And the bit that I found like really quite powerful was the fifth dimension bit, because I guess that band is seen as being on the kind of the poppier side of things. I mean, they say that in the documentary that they weren't considered by some to be in the same kind of a serious artist maybe as some of the other people on that stage. But being part of that festival meant a lot to them. And then the footage is lost. And then when they're watching it back and like tearing up to sort of say, we were there. I found that so powerful and so sad. Well, not sad, it was happy, but it was that thing where, not dissimilar to the fan, the 5-year-old you found, is that the fifth dimension had the same reaction, is that they said, oh, we were there. Like, sort of, it exists. I found that so powerful.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And maybe one thing I loved, speaking of humor in your film, Edgar, was maybe my favorite lower third I've ever seen, which was Beck, See Above.
I think
so I appreciate the humor.
I mean, it was just the thing, I kind of felt like it was the sort of, the thing about Ron and Russell, and it's funny because it's that thing when sometimes somebody says something that I'm not sure even they're aware that they've hit their own nail on the head. But Ron Mail is talking about French New Wave at one point, and he's talking about Jean-Luc Godard, and he says, I always liked him because he was like making films and like commenting on making a film at the same time. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of what Sparks do, and that's kind of what we're doing with the documentary. Is it's a documentary about Sparks, and at the same time you can sort of stand slightly aside and also sort of make funny jokes about making a music documentary as well. So we had a lot of fun with those aspects, and like the animation was something that kind of an early idea. They had done an animation video with this great director called Joseph Wallace, who'd done Sparks puppets. So it seemed like a no-brainer to bring them back. But then one of the crazy things with the pandemic is that, essentially pretty much like last year is where me and Paul was sort of given the gift of being able to totally concentrate on it, because the other movie that I was making had to go on hiatus, and it was like, we can do nothing except finish Sparks. It was kind of perfect in a way. Not to say that the pandemic is a good thing, it's terrible. But one thing is crazy is one of the animators who did a bunch of great stuff on it, this guy called Greg McLeod, who did all of the kind of the animation where it's got lip sync. I've never met him. I've spoken to him on the phone, and we've emailed and texted, and that's it. And that's sort of amazing that in this day, there's one of the people who made a significant contribution to the film I've never met in person. But it's sort of amazing that all of those bits were sort of done by email. Like, we'd give him very specific bits, say, what about this idea? He'd ping back a rough. I'd say, give him a couple of ideas for details and stuff. And some of those things, there was one bit very late in the day where maybe I could tell the story. The Pet Shop Boys wouldn't let us use an image of them in the film. and rather than that be a disaster that we couldn't show a Pet Shop Boys clip, it's like, call Greg McLeod. He can knock this out in 2 days. So he did another funny. So that was the thing, is that maybe that was even done after our Sundance submission. So I think the fanfare was as well.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, sorry, and I want to let everybody else speak. I think the thing that became clear to me is that I guess one of my questions about Sparks, in seeing how these guys were able to exist sort of so long with enough success to keep going, but never like sort of like getting really, really big. Although ironically, their last two albums charted in the UK top 10 for the first time since 1975, which is pretty impressive. But I just sort of realized how do they do it? And in meeting them and sort of working with them, I find it I'm even more admiring of them, because they basically, Sparks is like a lifetime pursuit, as in I don't want to say they have a monastic lifestyle, but kind of what you see in the film is pretty much it, is they sort of get up and sort of like go around to each other's houses and be Sparks, like sort of 24/7. There was never like a point in the documentary where I ever really saw them off. I've only once seen them separate from each other, which is also strange. But it is that thing where they say at the end that I think it's after 50 years that they don't really know where Ron and Russell end and Sparks starts. And that became very clear just being with them, is that they were never really like off. But in the best kind of, you know, there's that thing of never meet your heroes. It was like the perfect kind of exception to that. So, but ultimately, the message of the movie that became very clear was that just this total persistence of vision, of like sort of never give up on any artistic ambitions, like even in the face of even in the face of total indifference. If you feel something in your gut and you have a passion, or you believe that you have a talent, like they have just kind of like sort of bulldozed through for years when sometimes people didn't want to know at all. So it sort of becomes kind of like their story sort of becomes like the tortoise and the hare, really. It's like a 50-year overnight success story.
I love that, and I found it, you know, that part of it so inspiring. We're getting lots of questions here. One bucket of questions seems to be around, am I ever going to get to see all the footage of Summer of Soul? Are there going to be soundtrack albums for either of these films? Are these films going to be released someday? I'm sure they will be, but maybe anybody want to address any of these things?
I'll just say that it's taken 50 years to get to where we are today. So just give us a little bit of time, and hopefully, you know, within the next 50 years, there might be some more, but we're just thrilled to be where we are today. But thank you.
Hopefully there's enough to digest with what we have on the screen, so last people a little while.
But
I really want to say that this, you know, it's the fact that the film is that it's now 50 years. This, you know, that this history has been buried for 50 years, feels kind of perfect. Actually, it does feel like there could not be a better moment for the world to see this. Not only because it is such a clear. Such a clear example of how Black history and Black excellence is buried so often, but also because, you know, having with the events of the summer of 2020, it is vital to have something that is such an expression of joy and excellence and faith, and the way that so much Black culture comes out of the oppression and the suffering that still continues. I mean, I can't imagine that there could have been a more perfect time for this movie to hit people's consciousness than now. It just, yeah.
I have a question for my own team, because I see the chat tab too, and you know, some people, including my 20-year-old daughter, are like, I want to see all 30 hours. How do I do that? So, I mean, and someone actually asked a question in the chat, like, can the footage be donated to the Library of Congress? Like, what is the sort of legal status of the footage? And if you can't talk about it, I understand.
I mean, there is no status right now. We needed to get to the finish line to get the film ready for the festival, which we're thrilled we were able to make it there. I mean, listen, I think, you know, there's a lot that we can do in the future, but we have not made any of those plans yet.
I mean, I guess it makes sense that you can't just put up a full Stevie Wonder set on YouTube for free, obviously, because Stevie Wonder's licensing issues, correct?
Yeah, it's making this film was a challenge in its own right.
Yeah.
We're thrilled, so that's, I think the best I can say now.
Yeah.
We hope that everyone, that hasn't seen it gets the opportunity to see it, whether, I guess it's over at the festival right now, but, hopefully, in the near future, we're looking for a distribution deal, and hopefully that will come around.
Yeah.
I just want to follow up on what George was saying. Is like, I hope it doesn't take another 50 years, right? Like, I feel like I would encourage any filmmakers watching this right now, just tell the stories you're passionate about, especially Black stories. As I think I've talked to enough Black and brown filmmakers who pitch ideas and get doors shut in their face, and just be persistent, be passionate, find allies, commit to the project, because it's criminal that this footage and this story hasn't been told in 50 years. It is the perfect time for it, but it's unfortunate that it's the perfect time for it. I think just keep pushing out there, because I think these stories, there's so many more of these stories to be told.
Well, there was so much in the music, BB King doing the BB King song. I mean, that just brought tears to my eyes. And I mean, Nina Simone wrote Young, Gifted and Black in 1969, right? So that was possibly one of the very earliest performances of that song. And the fact that you guys had all that footage of the audience, and that you focused, that we could see this audience of, from little kids to older people hearing that incredibly powerful song, and to know, that Musa was, that was an incredible thing, because that this was that kid grew up with that inside him. And despite the fact that at some points he must have gone, did I dream that? Did I make that up? That was inside him always. And the film illustrates so brilliantly how vital the work of the artists that you showed in the film, and how vital that output is, and how it. Yeah,
I think about the fact that, one of the reasons it must have been so startling to Musa is that he never saw anything like that again.
Yeah.
Right. And so how incredible is that it took 50 years, for him to see that, so.
Yeah. And I would also say, I was just going to say too, that I think what was so interesting when I first got involved and I started to watch the footage was the realization that this wasn't just sort of like soul or Motown acts. There were, Latinx performers, Mongo Santa Maria, Ray Barreto. There were, jazz musicians from Roy Ayers to Sonny Sharrock to Herbie Mann. I mean, and then of course there were sort of the highlighters like Nina Simone and Sly Stone and the Fifth Dimension, and Stevie Wonder and Gladys Knight. I mean, it was such an eclectic mix of music at the time. And that really, was an example of what the community was like. Hugh Masekela lived in Harlem at the time. Abby Lincoln and Max Roach lived in Harlem. So it's really interesting for those that haven't seen the film, because I sometimes think that people think, partially because of the title, The Summer of Soul, it's not about soul music per se. It's really about our soul as people to some extent. So I just hope people ultimately get the opportunity to see that, and see that it is a very inclusive film in respect to its music.
I mean, I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb here to say that your films should get bought, will get bought, and will be seen this year. They're both too good not to. So I'm sure that will happen, and people will have a chance to see them. And one thing I just wanted to ask about, like the story about the moon landing and how it's perceived in the middle of the Harlem Festival, and then those incredible interviews people have, is like something that kind of was like a a mental record skip for me, and those kinds of things, surprises. I'm wondering, like, what, that's one example, but I'm wondering for everybody too, like, what were things you found along the way that you did not expect, things that that kind of surprised you about your own subject?
Well, can I just very quickly, I just want to say that obviously, again, with archival, you've got this idea that somebody comes to you and say, there's this, I've heard of these reels that are sitting in somebody's basement, and it's great in concept. And we all know that shortly after that, somebody goes and finds them, and you don't quite have the coverage, and they're not as good as it's not as good as it sounds. It must have been absolutely amazing when you saw this footage for the first time, when you actually started going through it, and you're like, hang on a second, let's get this right. Not only do we have such a huge amount of coverage, but everything is so beautiful. It's so well, it's just wonderful to actually look at. So it must have been a beautiful process. How was that? When did you remember when you first saw it, basically?
Joseph, do you want to talk about that, or when you first saw it? I mean, an example.
I mean, there's two sort of sets of archival, right? There's the festival archival, which is just, props to Hal Tulchin for shooting it on spec. He'd shot it on 2-inch videotape, which in '69 is somewhat advanced technology. He rigged the audio tracks to be sort of fake stereo, so that in the future someone could make a stereo mix out of this stuff. We were able to do so. He kept it in pristine condition. So there's that, and then there's the archival stuff digging around '69. We made a very conscious choice as filmmakers to use Black archival sources, so that you got a Black perspective on the sort of mainstream cultural events that previously had been only covered by the big three networks. A show called Black Journal, which ran in '68, '69, and '70. The moon landing park interviews, when you hear Harlem residents say that money would have been better spent on communities like Harlem, I mean, that's gold. And it was also the last piece of archival to clear, because we got it by mistake, and it was, Josh.
And then like the only piece, a lot's been said about how the concert wasn't covered. There were hardly any newspaper articles about it in mainstream newspapers, as far as we know. There weren't reporters on hand covering it. I've seen a lot of clips of reporters standing at Woodstock saying, behind me is a bunch of hippies. But the only reporter coverage on the scene that we found, that our archivist found, Lizzie McGlynn, was one reporter on the day of the moon landing asking the audience members about why didn't they think the moon landing was, what did they think of the moon landing? So that was sort of interesting. Like,
it was interesting. Just on that note, I mean, once we discovered that Walter Cronkite, who was sort of this iconic American broadcaster, actually cut to the reporter. So we were able to sort of piece it together, and that was phenomenal, with the idea that Cronkite was thinking that everyone in that crowd would buy into how amazing it was that we landed on the moon that day, only to hear the counter. So I think it was an eye-opener on the news itself that night. I'm not necessarily sure that clip ever made it to the news that night, but we have it, it's in the film.
I loved it because I've always loved the Gil Scott-Heron Whitey on the Moon, and to see the people at the time giving their reaction and stating the bleeding obvious, which I still think stands, quite frankly. Let's clean up the mess here before we go and mess it up out there. Phenomenal.
And Red Fox with the best line in the whole film.
Yeah.
Is there a piece of archival that you guys found for the Sparks Brothers that was hard to clear, or that you maybe couldn't use, or something?
Or you discovered and didn't realize, is there something you discovered that you didn't know about them already?
Because I love that Beatles, the clip of them seeing the Beatles, right?
Oh,
that's insane.
It's actually the Tammy show that they're at.
Oh, okay, got it.
Which is actually in that film. So that film, The Tammy Show, you see Ron and Russell in the crowd really briefly. So I think the Tammy Show was James Brown. I get mixed up with the TNT show and the Tammy Show.
James Brown.
Yeah. So they were in that crowd, which is kind of crazy. So that's just a sort of, and that was just a bit of lore. And then we found those clips. I mean, what's funny is that, I mean, maybe like George, you can speak to this, but I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware of it. But what's funny is when there are things like, there's lots of things that are on YouTube, but then you have to find where they've come from.
Doesn't master exist, you know.
And then very occasionally the YouTube version is better, and then you're like, well, where the fuck did that come from?
Yeah,
why is the YouTube version better than the one that the archive house gave us? But not I mean that. But like sometimes that would happen with some like videos where sadly the masters of music videos are lost, and the only decent copies are when they've been on another TV show. So you'd find that sometimes. I wasn't saying anything negative about the archive, but usually it was like the record company don't have the master of the video, but you might have a clip of it on a TV show and the TV show is intact. So sometimes you're coming at it from left field. I mean, one bit, it's not really an archive bit, but it came through us putting the word out. So we like wrote a piece that we put out on my social media and Spark's social media to ask fans if they had any footage, photos, or stories. And as George can tell you, we got a ton of stuff. But the favorite thing that came out of it, I think, as well as a ton of like Super 8 footage and film footage that fans had just taken on tour in the days where people would, instead of having everybody having their iPhones out, maybe one person would have a Super 8 per concert. But one thing that came out of it was that this fan wrote about a really eloquent story about her invading the stage at a concert, and it just so happened to be a concert that we had the footage of. So then it's this amazing thing, and not only did we have like Ron and Russell to talk about it, members of the band, the roadie Richard Coble, who pulls this 14-year-old stage invader off Ron Mayle, happens to now be the Rolling Stones tour manager, Richard Coble. And also we have the fan herself, and she wrote an email to George, and George said, read this email from this fan. And I was like, do you think she can say that on camera? Like, let's just get her to say that on camera. So we asked her, would you just read your email and tell the story? So it's kind of an extraordinary thing to then have like a fan who was 14 then in the documentary just telling the story, and then being able to cut to the 14-year-old her as she's playing.
Seeing herself for the first, because she hadn't seen that footage, so she got to see herself for the very first time since it had happened. I mean, she'd had it in her mind that she'd blown her chances with Ron by acting like a Crow super fan instead of saying, tell me, Ron, which is your favorite Jean-Luc Godard film? But I love that. I did love that moment where she's like, that's me.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was so cool was how the archives that you had validated how much influence the band had on other bands. And like Computer Girl blew my mind. I mean, I know Joseph's a fan of Kraftwerk. Like, who would have thought that, you know, that was Sparks way before Kraftwerk, right? I mean, so that was so cool, you know.
And as they said, you know, a computer? Seriously?
They admitted they didn't know what one is, didn't they? happy to write a song about it.
Well, that's the thing. I think that like they didn't really. That was the thing is, and especially then by cutting to the bands themselves. Like it's one thing to kind of show them like in 1979 on Top of the Pops, essentially inventing the synth duo. But it's another thing for Vince Clarke in the next clip to sort of say, "Yeah, no, we ripped that off from Sparks."
Right.
I love seeing Vince Clarke, and I love seeing Nick Hayward. How just normal they are, because in my head they're still those guys from so long ago.
Did you run into any bands that sort of denied that they were influenced by Sparks? Like,
the Pet Shop Boys.
not being in the movie, B, not clearing a clip from us. So, but their absence is noted.
Right.
Good. And I think we're just about out of time. One last question online here. I can't ask Amir, but I'll ask Edgar. Are you going to ever make another documentary?
I mean, I'd love to. If I found as you guys all know, because you make documentaries, I mean, it's all about how passionate you are. It's such a long process. You've got to be really like want to tell the story. So you're not just, it's not just similar to Sparks. It's sort of, it's art for art's sake in terms of like, so it's been, you know, it's always like a cliche to say passion project, but I think the best documentaries are, aren't they?
I can
Absolutely.
proxy answer for Amir because we've talked a lot about it. I think he's been so stimulated creatively by this process. I think he wants to make so many more.
That's great. Good. I see Abby, you're back. Are you telling us we're through?
I am. I mean, my initial plan was to come here and tell you that you have the floor for the entire day, but we don't have the space anymore. I mean, I know I'm biased. I'm totally biased in favor of these two films. As you know, I'm a musician myself, but I do genuinely feel these two are two of the greatest films we have at this year's festival, for many reasons, including everything you've discussed so far. From a musical perspective, I think the Sparks Brothers like speaks to a big deal of my own career. And Summer of Seoul, it was truly transformational to me, and made me kind of question a lot of things about my own identity as an Afro-Latino man and as a musician, and kind of the backstory that I never knew. So thank you so much for bringing such phenomenal masterpieces to this festival. I hope, Edgar, this is going to be the first of many, because I think you definitely got it for the documentary narrative. So I really hope you find that extra passion project. Paul and Josh, this editing is just masterful. So bravo and kudos to the two of you. This has been a major accomplishment. So I'm pretty happy to see that come to fruition. Morgan, thank you for being so generous. Edgar, George, Paul, Josh, Joseph, David, Robert, thank you so much for sharing space with us. What a wonderful way to close the Artist Lounge at the Sundance Film Festival 2021 this year. We definitely need to come back for another conversation at another festival in the future. This has been a phenomenal convo that I could listen to for ages. All right, so to send everyone off, I just want to say thank you one more time for joining this space. Again, it's been a crazy year, and what a way to reconnect with community and make sense of the world around us by having you all here and kind of break bread one more time, even virtually. So thank you so much. We're definitely going to post this online after the festival. So tune in. This is going to be great. I mean, and to circle back on what you said before, these two are definitely going to be picked up. So I hope to see them on the mainstream pretty soon. I hope the world is gonna get a chance to see them sooner rather than later. So if there's anyone from the industry right now in this call, you should be battling over these two. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Great talking to you.
Nice to
Bye,
meet you all.
everyone.
Bye.
Take care.